Really interesting thing happened this morning. I've woken up with some sort of an allergy. So I've got a little bit of nasal congestion, it's finding it hard to breathe, mouth breathing a lot more, and my traps are really tight and inflamed. I'm feeling a little bit foggy headed, and I've got this light dry cough, and just feeling a little bit more run down, which is really strange. Now, I'm very meticulous about what goes into my body and what I do and what variables I change, and I couldn't pinpoint anything as to why I should feel this way, except for one thing. Last night I had a slice of gluten-free bread. Now, this is a bread that I've had a lot in the past, and over the last 2 months, for no reason in particular, I just stopped having it. More due to preference than anything else. And again, due to preference last night, I thought I'll start to put it back in, and just had one slice. So this morning, I've woken up with all these reactions. Now, it may be completely unrelated. It may not be with that at all, but there's a strong chance, strong likelihood that it is. So what's going on here? Why didn't I get that previously, but I'm getting it now? What happens with the immune system when you are constantly activating it in terms of giving it certain foods, certain stresses? It might be hay fever season, it could be a multitude of factors, but typically let's talk about isolating it to food sensitivities and the use of, or the overuse of, certain types of foods. Really common with things like gluten, dairy, whey protein, eggs, particularly egg whites, and really any food that you repeatedly use over and over and over again. So it might be something innocuous like chicken breast or beef, or it might be broccoli or rice, potato. Now, what happens is when you're having these foods all the time, if it's setting off some sort of immune reaction, initially you do get a response, but you might not even notice it. However, over long term, your body starts to create what's called T cells, which are immune cells that are activated and slowly proliferate and grow in your body, and their role is to dampen down those immune reactions. So you won't notice those sort of things like runny noses, coughs, rashes, headaches, migraines, feeling lethargic and run down. You might not notice these things as much because the T cell production has gone up to a certain threshold and it's masking those reactions. Now, what happens when you take out that food or that offensive thing, whatever it might be, when you take it out over a period of at least 2 to 3 weeks to bring that threshold down about 50-60%, but ideally more like 6 to 8 weeks to bring it down completely and diminish it, you get that decrease and decline in T cell production, which is better. So what happens is when you put that food back in, particularly in high doses, but it could be small doses as well, when you put it back in, you no longer have that innate T cell response because it takes time to build up. So in that initial period, whether it's a day or a week or however long it is, when you reintroduce that sensitivity food or that trigger, you get all these reactions, you start to notice them. Now, for most of us, we just brush it off and don't think about it and say, oh, it's just whatever, it is what it is. But you got to understand things like this don't happen for a reason. The fact is, those flushing reactions, those nasal congestions, runniness, being run down and lethargic, having headaches, having a dry cough persistently, these are all immune responses, and they are actually all happening and occurring all the time. It's just that those T cells have been around to mask it from happening, or to mask your sensations of it happening. Now, to have that much T cell production constantly is not a good thing, because that constant immune activation at that high threshold, it's taking up precious resources. Now, you got to understand the immune system is not just focused on dealing with something like that. It's also responsible for maintaining proper gut health. It's responsible for fighting off any invading bacteria and pathogens. It's responsible for repairing your DNA, repairing your mitochondria, giving you proper energy, making you feel good and vital. It's also really, really important for hypertrophy. If you're looking at muscle growth, what are we doing in the gym? We are breaking down muscle tissue. We are creating stress to the body, and it's the immune system that has to come on in and restore all of that, build everything back together. But if the immune system is too busy if it's too focused on dealing with producing T cells to mask the symptoms that you're having through all these inflammatory reactive foods or stress in general, then you can't be building muscle as efficiently. You can't be repairing your DNA as efficiently. You can't be repairing and renewing your mitochondria or the cells in your body efficiently. And that's where you can start to get this slow decline in health. And it can't necessarily be pinpointed to just one thing. So what I'm curious about for you guys is, are there any foods that you've noticed that give you reactions like this? And maybe you've passed it off as just one of those things in the past, never really linked it to certain foods. Are there any foods that do that for you? The common ones, you're looking at gluten, you're looking at dairy, eggs, whey protein, maybe chicken. But you can get some random ones. Like for me, at the moment, it's capsicums. I can't have too many capsicums or I start to get these sort of reactions. So leave me a comment below. I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say about it. So today is back training again. My second, actually this is the start of the week, this is the first session in terms of my primary and secondary sessions. You'll see a lot of similarities between this session and the one that I did and uploaded the other day. There are a couple of modifications to the exercises. Like I mentioned in that last workout, now I'm going to be using exercises that are a little bit more neurologically demanding, that allow for heavier weights to be lifted and a little bit more aggression and explosiveness. This will probably be my last time through this week or this cycle of training before I look to switch things up. I feel like I mentioned on my arm workouts the other day, I'm getting to a point where I'm getting all that I can out of these sessions in terms of the stimulus, in terms of the exercise, in terms of the reps and sets and the volume. So to continue beating on that dead horse isn't going to be a viable option. So as always, I hope you enjoy this session, and as always, you can leave questions in the comments below. All right, so starting off with some wide supinated grip sternum chin-ups. So as much as you see chin-ups and pull-ups in my own programs, I want you guys to know that chin-ups and pull-ups are not for everybody. They work really well for me based on my biomechanics and the fact that I've trained into it over many, many years. But for those of you who have longer levers or who have any pre-existing tendonitis issues through the elbows, it might not be ideal, and you're probably better off using a pull-down variant with the same kind of line of pull and trajectory while you build up the strength, if you ever get to the point where you can do them properly with some weight. But for most people with longer levers, it ends up just bashing up their joints long term with minimal carryover to their lats. So with the trajectory here, I'm arching my back aggressively, getting a huge arch, lifting up my ribcage, expanding my ribcage, and trying to pull the lower rib, lower sternum towards the barbell. So I'm pulling not just vertically, but I'm leaning back and trying to get my body almost horizontally into a row motion, which is what makes these such a complete lat exercise and such a big builder for the overall back, particularly the lower lats. Anyway, I was meant to be hitting sets of 5 here up to a max weight and then dropping back to sets of 3. But I wasn't feeling too great today in terms of my neurological output. It took me longer to warm up and get into the groove of things. So I stuck with sets of 5 and just kept with a comfortable kind of weight for multiple sets to accrue a fair bit of volume. Next up, I went over to the barbell row with, again, a wide supinated grip, which I'll get to in a sec. Anyway, what's happening here is I'm trying to get my abs right down onto my quads to get a deep stretch. So I'm supporting myself slightly to give myself a little bit of balance and stability, but at the same time, it's allowing me to get a really deep stretch through my lats and my thoracolumbar fascia. That's just a fancy way of saying the lower back, lower lat region. Anyway, the podium and the small plates help to get a really deep stretch, because you see here the barbell is just about scraping the top of my feet on each rep and the bottom. I'm letting that weight stretch me out slightly, keeping the elbows just slightly bent in the stretch position to keep the tension on the lats and not the bicep tendon. And I'm pulling explosively and moving relatively loosely. This is a really good movement if you got the control and endurance for it to build up and lengthen and decompress the lower back area, and it matches up really well with all the compressive work from before on the sternum chin-ups or the sternum pull-downs if you were doing pull-downs. So I just worked up over 3 sets to 1 top set of 6. I was meant to do more, but again, things are not feeling too great, so I don't want to push it too hard. I just want to get some volume in, get some stimulation in, and then get back out. So finishing up here with some wide grip, supinated grip again, partial deadlifts, starting from the top. So it's a slow eccentric, pausing just at the kneecap or just below the kneecap. Now let's talk about this grip. This wide and supinated grip helps to put a slightly deeper stretch onto the lats to place more tension there. But in particular, it puts that humerus, which is like that upper arm region, it puts it into external rotation, or it turns everything out slightly. Now what that does is it places more tension onto the external rotator muscles of the shoulder girdle. So the muscles of around the upper back, around the scapula, their role is to stabilize the scapula. It's to stabilize the head of the humerus isometrically, under load, under reps, under high volume, under high intensity. So you see a lot of people doing those external rotator cuff exercises with dumbbells in an isolated manner, but that's not a bad exercise, but long term you've got to realize that the role of those muscles is a stabilizing role, not necessarily to go through actual movement, although they should do some. So exercise like this and keeping that external wide grip theme through the entire workout helps to place that much more tension on the external rotators in their isometric role, in their stabilizing role, while also having carryover benefit to targeting the lats a little bit more effectively. And the final exercise for this workout was back to some more dumbbell preacher curls. So you saw me doing these just a few days ago for my shoulder and arm day, and I'm coming back to them simply because it's a movement that's working really well for me right now, and I want to keep milking it for as much as I can while it's feeling good, because I do know that for me, with arms being a stubborn body part, it can be very hit and miss. Some days it'll feel great, some days it'll feel bad. So when I find a good sequence, a good intensity scheme, or whatever else it might be, I like to stick with it and use it until it starts to dissipate, as opposed to adding in too much variety of exercises and planes of movement unnecessarily, which I do find tends to lead me to stagnate with my progress a lot more in terms of just trying to find that perfect exercise. So again, what's happening here is doing a slow eccentric and focusing on getting pauses on the way down on that first eccentric, and then the other two are assisted concentric, and going for about a 6 to 8 second lowering phase just to add that extra time on the tension. Overall, I'm hitting reps of about 4 or 5 on the work sets, and then using the extra intensifiers of the pauses and the slow eccentrics to add a little bit more volume to really finish off the biceps. And the final downshift of today's workout. So I'm getting really fancy here with my videoing, showing you 2 videos side by side just to show you the first and second sets from my fascial stretching in the shoulder extension. So you'll see here the increased range of motion just from the extra minute that I took post-workout to stretch things out. Now this is really important and something that's really overlooked, because if I'm accessing this new range of motion, or this, like, I'm refinding that old range of motion that I lost through training, now I'm going to get better blood flow. I'm going to start to stimulate that parasympathetic response a little bit earlier post-workout, which is really important, because when it comes to recovery, the faster you can get out of that stressed out, jacked up and tight state from training, the faster you can start to remodel your tissue and start to grow. So something like this can be a really effective way to just downshift, turn on that PNS and chill out and improve blood flow back to the target regions post-workout. So I just did about 10 minutes worth of stretching there, a little bit of contract, relax, and that was it. So that was a lot more challenging than I thought it would be. There's a couple of things going through my mind right now. Was today's performance a sign of overreaching, which is part of what is intentional? This is my 4th, maybe even 5th from memory, rotation through this similar kind of sequence. So it may very well be that my nervous system is just starting to accrue that much more volume, damage, and stress, and is finally at a point where it's time to switch things up, which is overdue anyway. I was planning on making this my last week, as I said at the start of the video. So maybe it's that. Now, it might also be to do with that immune response that I've been having since this morning, since the ill-fated gluten-free bread incident last night. It could be both. I'm not going to read too far into it. I'm going to continue the rest of this week, finishing off this training cycle as normal, and realize what is actually going on. So, not disappointed. I don't like to ever leave the gym disappointed anyway. Everything that we do is part of a learning curve and trying to understand more and more about our body. This is all useful information to start to be able to piece together how hard you can push, when you shouldn't push, what kind of foods your body responds to, what it doesn't respond to, etc., etc. So that is that. Tomorrow is going to either be pressing or lower body. We'll see how I feel. I was planning on modifying my training week a little bit more this week, just to condense things a little bit, so I don't need to accrue so much volume, but we'll see how I'm feeling. And I'll check back in with you guys then. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like the post, and as I said before, leave me a comment below. Tell me about those foods. What is it that reacts badly with you? Looking forward to reading your comments.